Hi, in this third video we will learn how to organize the objects inside 3D Studio Max. If you are working with a large number of objects, um, you want to be able to access certain types of objects quickly, maybe to hide them or to select them or to delete them, and there are different ways to do that in Max. The first thing we will learn is how to use layers. Now, layers it's a good way to, let's say you have many objects in the scene, and you like to organize these objects by type. Let's say you have doors, you have windows, you have whatever, tables. Uh, Layers, it's a good way to create one layer for a certain type of objects. Let's say one layer for the doors, one layer for the windows, etc. This way you can select the doors quickly or the windows, and then you can just hide them or delete them. Uh, when you open Max in the beginning, if you didn't touch the toolbar, you will not see the layer toolbar by default. So you need to add it. So right click in an empty space here and click layers. Now click and drag it and place it here in the main toolbar. By default you have one layer. If you click here and drop down menu, you have only one layer. It's layer 0. Now by default, every object you create in the scene, it is placed immediately in the current layer. A current layer means the layer that you see here. Now if you have more than one layer, uh, your objects will be placed in the layer that it is currently visible here. So now every object I create, it will be placed in the layer 0. So first, let's create some objects to work on. Let's create a box. I'm in the create panel, geometry, standard primitives. I will click the box, click, drag to set the width and length, release the mouse button, then move the mouse up, click, then right click to turn off the button. Let's create another object, a sphere. Click and drag to set the radius. Maybe also a tube. First click and drag to set the radius. Release the mouse button, move the mouse button to set the thickness of the tube, then click to set the thickness, then move the mouse up or down to set the height. Click, then right click to turn off the button. I will do Alt W to maximize the perspective viewport, the active viewport. Let's create another box. Click, drag, right click. Now, let's say I want to place my boxes in a separate layer. What I can do, I can click here, this button here, toggle layer explorer. This window will open. Now click this button here to create a new layer. Name it, let's say I will name it box. Click outside to accept the name or enter. by default, I will close the dialog. Okay, by default, the new layer will be the current layer. But now all my objects are on the layer 0. So first I will select this box, and by the way, if you want to select more than one object like we did before, I can just drag a rectangle to select both, or you can also use another way to add to the selection. You can just click the first object, then press the control key, keep pressing it. While it is pressed, click another object. Now both are selected. To remove an object from selection, click the Alt key, and while the Alt key is pressed, click an object, and now only this box is selected. Okay, so now I will choose those two boxes. I will go here. It is labeled Add Selection to Current Layer. That means those, if I click this button, those two selected objects will be placed in this current layer. So I will click. Now these two boxes now are on layer box, and those two here are still in the layer 0. If I click the drop down menu, now I have 0 and box. Here, if I click this one, this, I will be freezing the objects inside the box layer. Freezing mean I cannot select them anymore, and this is a good way to prevent you from moving or deleting some objects while you are working with a large number of objects. Now you cannot do it. You can not select them or do anything with them. They are just there. I will click here again, unfreeze. Now they are not frozen. Also, if I click here, I will turn off the layer. The objects will disappear, will be off, will be hidden. I will unhide the objects. If I click here to turn off the layer 0, as you can see, those two objects disappeared. I will unhide them. Now let's say if you have a large number of layers, you want to make the current layer the layer that belongs to this object. We know that this object is in layer 0. So you select this object, and this button here, it says set current layer to selections layer. So if I click it, the current layer becomes the layer of this object. And this is useful. Let's say you decided that you're gonna create new objects and you want to place the new objects in the same layer like these two. So you just click here and set the current to the selections layer. So now everything I create now, it will be placed in the current layer, which is 0 now. This button here, it says select objects in the current layer. Now this is the current layer. If I click it, objects in the layer 0 will be selected. So I will click it. Now these two are selected. Now I will switch to box layer. I click the select objects in the current layer button. Now these two are selected and these are deselected. In Max, when you select an object and then you select another object, the first one is deselected. And like we said before, if you want to add to the selection, you just click Control and then click another object to select more than one object. So let's try to add another layer. Here, if you click here, the arrow, you can see the objects inside the layer. If I click the arrow here, I have the sphere and the tube on the layer 0. I will create a new layer, call it tube. Now it is the current one, but it's empty. So I will click the tube, then click add selection to current layer. Now this tube is in the layer tube. I can turn it off, on, or freeze it. You can also freeze an object by selecting it, right click and say freeze selection. I can select more than one object and say freeze selection. Now, so you can freeze by layer, or you can freely freeze any amount of objects in the scene. Now I can right click and say unfreeze all. So this is for the layer. And by the way, you can create a new layer without opening this dialog using this one. When you click it, there is this dialog that lets you decide the name of the new layer. Let's say sphere. And here you have an option that move selection to new layer. That means if you have an object that is currently selected, if you click OK, a new layer will be created called sphere in this case, and the selected object will be placed inside this new layer immediately. So currently this sphere is in the layer 0. So if I choose this option and I select the sphere, now if I click OK, a new layer will be created called sphere, and this sphere will be placed inside this layer. So I will click OK. Now this layer is current. Like we said, every new layer becomes current by default. So now if I click the drop down menu, if I turn off the layer, the sphere is off because it is in the sphere layer. I'll turn it off again. So and always remember, any new object you create, it will be placed here in the current layer. So be careful to switch to the desired layer when you create a new object. Another way to organize your work, let's say you want to, sometimes you are testing some, in rendering you are testing, and you don't want all objects to be included in the rendering, and you like to hide certain types of objects, and you like to select them quickly to hide them, or maybe to delete them, or to move them, or whatever. And maybe these objects are not from the same type. Maybe you like to be able to select the tube, the sphere, and this box. There is another way, very flexible, called selection sets. I will create more objects. I will click the teapot, click and drag to set the radius, right click. If I want to change its parameters while it's selected, I can go to modify panel, then change the radius. Okay, and again let's create a pyramid. Click and drag to set the length and width of the base. Release the mouse button, move the mouse up, click to set the height. Okay, now I will create a selection set. Let's say I want to be able to select quickly those three objects. So I will select three of them. Here I will click inside this dialog box and give it a name. Give this selection a name. Let's say I will call it objects to hide, let's say, whatever. I can press enter or click outside to accept. So now I will click in an empty space to deselect them. Now they are deselected. Let's say I want to select them again. I will click the drop down menu. I can see the name of the selection set. If I click it, three of them are selected. I will click outside to deselect. Now let's create another selection set for these objects. So I will select three of them. I will call it objects to hide. Enter. Now I deselect. Now I can choose this selection set. You can see the number of selected objects here, and or I can choose this one, this selection set. If you want to remove one object from a certain selection set, you can click the edit name selection sets, and this dialog will open. Now I will go to this selection set. If I click this plus, I can see the objects inside. There are these three objects. Let's say I want to remove the tube from this selection set. What I can do, I can click the tube, click the name of the selection set, and then click this button labeled subtract selected objects. If I click, as you can see, it disappeared here. So now if I choose the objects to hide selection set, only those two objects will be selected. Of course, I can also add objects. Let's say I want to add it again. I can click the tube objects to hide, then plus add selected object. And by the way, two selection sets can share the same objects. Let's say I want to have this tube also to be part of the objects to hide. So I can click the name of the selection set, then plus. As you can see, tube 001 is here and here at the same time. So now I can choose the first selection set, then the second selection set. The tube is selected in both cases. There are other features, like if you select the name of the selection set, you can click this one that makes you select all objects in the selection set. It has the same effect like clicking here or here. Let's add some other objects also. Now we're gonna move to another way to organize your objects. At the same time, we can learn to create some objects. Now, instead of creating three-dimensional objects, geometry, I can go to shapes. Let's create a line. Click line. Now click without dragging, just click, 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 and then right click to stop the creation, and then right click again to turn off the line. Let's create a circle. Click the circle, click and drag to set the radius, right click. Let's create a arc. Click and drag Now release the mouse button, then move your mouse up and down to set the radius of the arc, and then right click N gun, click and drag, and right click. Now you can go to modify panel while it's selected and decide how many sides it should have. Now, the other way I like to talk about to organize your objects, it's called group. Grouping means, uh, let's say you have some objects that basically you know that um, you're not gonna modify a lot, or you know, it's like when if you place some furniture in a house and you know that they're gonna stay there, and if for some reason you like to hide them, you like to move them, or you just like, I mean, you want to be able to uh, play around with them very quickly as a group. Uh, um, it's there is a way that you can just create a group from a certain objects in a way that if you click on one object, all the group is selected, and then you can move them around as a group. I will show you how. When you see it, you understand. Um, let's say I want to have these objects to be one group. I can go to group, click and click group, and give the group a name. We'll call it set1 and click. Now as you can see, you read here set1, and if you notice, the letters are in bold. Every time you see a bold letters in 3D Studio Max, that means you selected a group. Now I will click outside to deselect. Now I can click on any object in this group. As you can see, all of them are selected. Now I can go to move and move them all as a group, or rotate them. Uh, Now let's say for some reason you like to modify one object or more than one object in this group. You like to change the position or rotation or scale, or let's say I want to change the height of this pyramid, let's say. Now I cannot do anything with the pyramid, because when I click here, it shows that I selected the group, so I cannot access the parameters of this pyramid. So what I can do, I can open temporarily this group by selecting it first and then go to group and say open. When you click open, you see these pink brackets. Every time you see pink brackets inside 3D Studio Max, that means you have a group and this group is opened. Now I can click on any object to select it. Let's say now I want to change the width of the base of the pyramid, the length, make it taller. Let's say I want to rotate the teapot, and I will click W for move, then I will move it. As you can see, the brackets expand to compensate the objects. Um, Click on this rectangle, the XY, to move the line on the X and Y plane. Click the tube. Okay, if I'm satisfied with the result, I can close the group again. To close it, you have to click the pink bracket and then go to group and say close. Now it is closed again. You can create a group of groups. For example, I can select this, I can drag a rectangle. Now I have this group selected and these individual objects selected. I can go to group and create a group, set to, okay. Now I have a big group, and inside, if I go to group and say open, I can manipulate these individual objects here, but if I click here, I will be selecting the second group inside this big group. So I need to click again open to be able to manipulate these individual objects inside this group. So now I will choose the brackets for this inner group, go here and close, then click here and then close. Now if I want to delete the group, I mean not delete the objects, I mean I want to ungroup a group, I can select it, then go to group and say ungroup. Now these objects are single objects, but this one is still a group. I can go to group again, say ungroup, and now these are ungrouped. And basically that's it for this video. I said in the last video that this one will be the last one before we start to do some exercises, but I don't want this video to be too long like the last one, so I will do another one to explain some more features, and after that we will start to do some small objects and learn more about 3D Studio Max from doing small objects. And that's it for now. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.